Hi, this is Esther Lynn, photographer for MMAfighting.com, and I'd like to share my experiences from an epic triple fight week, UFC Fight Night 80, The Ultimate Fighter Season 22 finale, and UFC 194 Aldo vs. McGregor. The triple fight week began with an open workout for Namajunas vs. Van Zandt Fight Night. Rose Namajunas started the workout showing off intense speed and a superb killer haircut that people kept jabbering nonsense about. Then she brightened up the space when she brought her furry friend Mishka to the mats and they circled each other a bit. It was so nice to see Namajunas serious in her workout, but then having fun with her dog in a way that made everything very comfortable, and it told me a lot about her state of mind. Then her opponent, the chipper and well-favored Paige Van Zandt, took to the stage, demonstrating a bevy of skills on her training partner Chris Holdsworth. Van Zandt and Namajunas will be kicking off the week of triple events with their fight at the Cosmopolitan later this week. The next morning was a double media day for the following two events and the beginning of a very long day. It was endless interviews and scrums while I did my usual bouncing around for photos and had the most fun with Tony Ferguson, who went through a gamut of expressions and poses, which made this gauntlet more fun. And always, how can you resist getting a smile out of the stoic Gunnar Nelson? An hour later, we were in the arena for the UFC 194 press conference and listening to the same banter we've been hearing for months, but this time, Conor McGregor seemed surer, quieter. Aldo seemed calmer too. Ready. When Weidman and Rockhold faced off, they talked and talked and talked. I wonder what they said. I wish we'd talked about how they'd come up. East Coast versus West Coast, two extraordinary underrated grapplers with real clean, lovely striking. This was a fight I'd been waiting to see for years. Still early in the week, this face-off didn't have the threat of violence like their previous ones, but I was still fascinated by this visual contrast. McGregor usually donning a suit. This time, Aldo was in the more formal attire, and McGregor looked ready to spring into action with the stretchiest jeans ever. After the press conference, we then had weigh-ins for UFC Fight Night 80. Another fun contrast to visuals here with Van Zandt's hands up in Namajunas' calm, expressionless face. Namajunas' hands were at her waist, seemingly not at all concerned about the fists in hers. Then, always my favorite thing ever is the face forward. I love Rose's flex juxtaposed with Paige's cheerleader point, with UFC President Dana White shrinking away in the middle to avoid a stray elbow in the face. The next morning, there were open workouts for UFC 194, and despite the early hour, the fans were already out in full force and quite intoxicated. This man, who I suppose fancied himself a McGregor impersonator, ran up and down the aisles, accosting Aldo as he warmed up. Jose Aldo hit mitts to the warring sounds of Brazilian support and Irish descent. He looked fierce and without the usual fatigue of a fighter cutting weight. Weidman played around, taking down his coach Ray Longo and making a game of the workout. Luke Rockhold then ascended the stage, quietly throwing all manner of spinning things. He took off his shirt halfway through to the song of women screaming, then resumed kicking the crap out of some unfortunate pads. Rockhold had been reminding us yesterday and today that he was going to beat Weidman because he had already faced tougher competition in Jacare and Tim Kennedy. And to end the workouts, McGregor began his session with spinal waves, soundtracked by the quiet grumble of confused fans. McGregor then hit pads. Conor's workout was bookended by more drills with movement coach Ido Portal. The fans were silent by this point, unsure of what they were seeing between their blood alcohol levels and the bright lights. Then, it was time for the Ultimate Fighter Season 22 finale weigh-ins, and I can't tell you how overwhelmed I am by this week, because there are too many good fights. Like this one, totally overshadowed by the immensity of the event. The next Ultimate Fighter was to be decided this week as well, and it was flying under the radar of the giants. Giants like Edgar and Mendes, I'd watch fight any time they're on a card. Frankie Edgar has been looking so incredibly sharp on this run. I knew this would be memorable. As soon as the weigh-ins ended, we ran over to the Cosmopolitan for the first fight of the week, Kylan Curran versus Emily Kagan. Curran won her fight with what seemed like half of the island here in the Chelsea Theatre cheering for her. She waved as she left the cage in victory. Danny Roberts finally makes his long-awaited UFC debut and chokes out veteran Nathan Coy, who was also finally making his debut. Coy started to gasp, and then gurgled as Roberts locked in the triangle and foam bubbled out of his mouth as he went unconscious. Then, the perpetually impressive Aljamain Sterling did his thing again, and capped his performance off with another, as he celebrated his win with a dance. Sage Northcutt did Sage Northcutt things. But we're here for the main event. Namajunas and Van Zandt get right into it. Namajunas wasted no time and got Van Zandt down and unleashed a series of elbows, one of which took a tiny chunk out of Paige's cheek. Blood began to pour out of the cut while Paige defended wave after wave of submission attempt from the slick Rose. It looks like a horror film. The killer Namajunas is whispering to the crimson-covered blonde victim as she brings her in for slaughter. When the first round finally ended, Van Zandt looked up at her face on the big screens in the theater, hypnotized by her new mask. Namajunas' submission attempts didn't stop, and neither did Van Zandt, but the pain was apparent in her face. Rose stayed incredibly patient, not letting any discouragement creep in as the energy went out. In the fifth, Rose seized her opportunity, brought Paige in close and finished the fight, the defeated Van Zandt with that exhausted tap. In refreshing, mature contrast to her age, Van Zandt admitted she was outclassed, tearfully admitting she lacked the skill to win her bout. She proudly displayed her stitches. And the also quite young Rose Namajunas entered the press conference all smiles. Namajunas noted her own improved patience was a key to her victory. Namajunas' dominant win was so remarkable in the way she won every area so cleanly. Her excellent transition from striking to grappling, standing to ground, careful not to make any mistakes. It was a night of successes for some splendid young fighters. After a fantastic night of fights, we were back in the MGM Grand Garden Arena for a Q&A with bantamweight champ Holly Holm. The Irish fans were, again, already sloshed, amusing the champ with their sometimes rude questions, but eventually warming the moment by breaking out into song. Holm took the craziness in stride, laughing through it all. Middleweight champion Chris Weidman and challenger Luke Rockhold faced off at the weigh-ins, and same as the days before, talking through their face-off. This is going to be a great fight. The Irish contingent exploded as McGregor took to the stage. He did his wild-eyed battle cry while the crowd roared back. Media whispered rumors of his difficulty cutting weight, said the Irishman looked like death. When Aldo got on the scale, he was calm, dead-eyed, but not drawn out, focused. Then, in a neat reversal of roles, Aldo took McGregor's usual low stance just as they faced off and playfully slapped the interim champion. McGregor grabbed the Brazilian's wrist and a little fray broke out. The switch turned the crowd upside down. What does this mean for tomorrow? I packed up and rushed over to the Cosmopolitan because it's fight night, again. The Ultimate Fighter Season 22 finale was upon us, and I missed the first fight because the events were only an hour apart but at separate venues. As the doctors tended to Joby Sanchez, I heard Howard's coach Mark Delagrati say as he walked past the row of photographers with his group, referring to Means versus Howard the night before, "My guy was knocked out by a left hook too." It was another night full of action and head wounds, like this hematoma here on Mike Pierce, acquired during his loss to Ryan LaFleur. And then this one. I don't know if I can even properly describe how insane this fight was, but I can say that I found myself not working at moments because I was just watching. Just enamored with the feral violence of Barboza versus Ferguson. It was filled with all my favorite things: elbows, body hooks, body kicks, slick submissions, an early Christmas present. It was so utterly exhausting to be in this fight that even in victory, Tony Ferguson collapsed backward in relief. Then, Ryan Hall did Ryan Hall and won the Ultimate Fighter through his unrelenting grappling. It's time for our second main event of the week. Frankie Edgar runs out, Steadicam operator chasing him down. And, as if he had somewhere to be, Edgar ends the fight quickly with a rapid combination containing what's becoming the punch of the week so far, a short left hook. From that swift devastation, Edgar bounded away, leaving announcers Brian Stan and John Anik with dropped jaws. Edgar growled at us happily, then wiped his head in that joy that looks like disbelief. How wondrous this win is for him, and another notch in his hunt for the featherweight title. Though, what misfortune for the perennial challenger in Chad Mendes. The pain certainly heavier in his heart than in his head after another crushing setback. As Edgar marched backstage, his smile seeming to light the way, I took in a huge breath. Another night of fights in the books. Fatigue starting to set in, but we have another grand night ahead. That, too, was hard to believe. How could the week keep getting better? It's fight day. Again. Morning came too quickly as we crawled out of bed, made ourselves presentable, and head to the pre-fight media day. The champ Holly Holm answered questions in the scrum alongside many of the fighters on upcoming cards. I peered into the empty arena before the doors opened. I was feeling impatient. The giant crowd of fans waiting to enter the arena were feeling antsy too. It's been a long, exciting, exhausting week, and well, maybe the human liver can only take so much. The night was a fantastic blur. Uriah Faber brawled it out with Frankie Science in a grueling affair filled with superb elbows. And in the dream matchup of grappling greats, Damian Maia proved his dominance over Iceland's Gunnar Nelson in a fight that looked a lot like last night's tough finale. Nelson spent the entire 15 minutes protecting his neck and limbs from constriction. I watched the challenger enter the octagon, hiding my pride. Seeing the Strikeforce champ finally get to prove the greatness of so many of the fighters he'd faced felt like victory already. Rockhold spent much of the first round defending takedown attempts from Weidman, who apparently was speaking to him through much of that round. But once Luke Rockhold wrenched back control of the fight, he never let go. And he landed body kicks, elbows, punches, looking exhausted but still going in for that finish. As the third round came to a close, I wondered if it was over. Somehow, it wasn't. Weidman's corner rushed to him, Cutman worked on his face. When the fourth round began, many of us wondered how it wasn't stopped in the last, and it looked to speed right to the end this time. And in exerting every last drop of energy, referee Herb Dean steps in. Weidman just sits in place, head down, while Rockhold walks away, only taking a few steps before collapsing onto the canvas, completely drained, so there was nothing left inside him, even to celebrate. He rolled over, looked for rest, but training partner and light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier rushed into the cage and picked him up like a sack of potatoes, slung him over his shoulder for a victory lap. After letting the new champ down, Cormier planted a big sloppy kiss on the barely protesting Rockhold. This face, it's both joy and pain, as if lifting his arm could not be done without help. Weidman looks deflated in the background, his posture broken and slumped. That joyous half-cry face of true accomplishment after hardship. Rockhold's teary confession of a serious infection that he'd fought through despite its effect on his main weapons. I'd heard rumblings of illness during the week and wondered how it would all play out. A gash split Weidman's face in half. He looked up at the giant screens, watching replays, the belt wrenched from him. As he left the cage, Chris Weidman began to sob. It was a heartache that made his body convulse, and I felt an intense shame to be photographing him in such a moment. The anguish radiated in a way my own chest hurt. Back in the cage, the folks from AKA gathered around to soak in the triumph. This one was for them all. I felt tears stream down my face. This felt like some small vindication for me too, for the years I kept telling everyone about the talent at Strikeforce. I could have packed up and gone home then. This was a main event to cap any night. But the night wasn't over. We still had the very fight we'd seemingly been waiting for forever. McGregor ascended the stairs to the octagon, arms raised for the thousands of fans who traveled far and wide to be here in support. Then, it was time for the man who'd remained undefeated for 10 years to emerge from the tunnel. Jose Aldo ran out to the cage, feet already bare. In the darkness, we waited again. My memories start to blur here. It was loud and there was song. The collective anticipation vibrated the arena. In shadows, a red light cast its promise of violence on both men. Aldo kept his head down. Even as they met in the center, Aldo kept his eyes averted, chambering that aggression. As the commissioners and cameramen backed out of the cage, Aldo finally lifted his head, and he was ready to meet eye to eye with McGregor. This is it. This is finally happening. And I missed it. I think of how during Rousey versus Holm, I had seen the image in my head before it happened. I could picture the end. But here, having not seen Aldo mortal in so many years, and really almost no true expectation for this bout, but just to see it happen, I had not thought of this outcome. So soon as well. And I only caught the half second after as the longtime champion reeled from the impact. The follow-up hammer fist came down with frightening precision, and if you look carefully, you can see the skin on Aldo's brow rippling back from the force. The crowd exploded, but it was muted. The knockout came so quickly as fans were still getting into their songs, cheering for the start of the bout. So many were still settling into their seats after waving their flags about that they didn't even see what had happened. As the replay hit the screens and McGregor took to the top of the cage and made it rain and grinned as middle fingers danced, thousands of arms shot up, frenzied faces started shouting, beer flying. Tricolors sailed into the air. The belts were now unified. Thunderous applause and celebration. The joy belonged to everyone. But still in the cage, blood dripping off the end of his nose like a tear, Aldo stared at the new champ, the sting of the short left shot still with him. He was inconsolable. Covering his face with a towel, the now former champion shrank into the fence and sat down. Conor McGregor took his time, soaking every feeling in as he slowly walked around the octagon, surveying his kingdom. Then he embraced and shared the victory with his team and family. Jose Aldo left, his towel on his head, and my focus softened as his arm crossed in front of me. But the scarred man was still there under that blood-spotted cotton armor. The agony could not be hidden. Conor McGregor emerged from the octagon the undisputed featherweight champion of the UFC. Every photographic apparatus pointed at this man who just 2 years ago was some loudmouth Irishman without a pot to piss in. Who else saw this but Conor and his team? Outside, fans that had been pushed out of the arena refused to leave, saying at the top of their lungs in the well of the exit stairs, It was a wild but positive excitement. I ran into the center and everyone jumped into the air singing around me. I ducked back out and ran up to the press conference. There's no staying impartial here. Years of working for Strikeforce and so much time singing the praises of this surfer dude, I am so proud of this man. Rockhold's eyes still glistened with a tear. I thought back to a trip I'd taken to Tokyo with Luke Rockhold and Sherlock's Jack Encarnacio a few years ago, and I smiled. After posing for all the photographers, he then looked down at his new belt, caressing its inlaid jewels. The day is cleared, and rather than sit at a table, Conor McGregor decided he would command the press conference from the podium. He spoke of his true self-belief, that unwavering confidence in the future that he drove towards. I envy that power, to know and see what you want from your life, and have the inner and outer strength to carry it all out. Many had dismissed his talk as fable or fantasy. And when we think of who we are, what we want, what we will achieve, how much of us truly believe it? How much of us go through and put in the effort to make that achievement a reality? We don't all have the stomach for the blood we'll lose, the pain we'll face, and probably we don't truly think we'll get that far. But he knew. Conor McGregor was so sure of it, almost so sure as to make it sound implausible. But really, McGregor set some glorious goals and reached them. We doubt so much the confidence we cannot have in our own hearts. As he wrapped his interview with Ariel Helwani without speaking, he stopped and posed here with this sincere smile. McGregor then turned, laughing, grabbing the arms of his friends as they strode away toward the promise of a hearty meal. This is Esther Lynn for MMAfighting.com. Thank you for watching.